2360 students. I hope everyone is having a great week and you've had a great last couple of weeks. I know you're on fall break, but we're still working through Module 5. So we just finished up Module 5, and it was all about how do you really facilitate development skills. Looking at, okay, so we have our case study child. We are now going to look at our schedule and where can we try to support these goals. So where can we embed these activities, these opportunities for these students to be able to be successful with the goals that we have for them. And that was part of your case study assignment, that case study embedded opportunity. And then also your Module 5 quiz. So we're going to move into the second part when we're talking about implementing early, inclusive early childhood programs and what that looks like. But we're going to, instead of looking at the development skills and how we can look for opportunities in the schedule to embed certain activities to reach those goals, we're really going to look at how do we manage those challenging behaviors in the classroom, which is really important. Another thing I want to note here on our calendar is that you have your inclusive practices fieldwork. So this is going to be your main project that I've been encouraging you to work on all semester. And I said that it has so many parts that you couldn't possibly do it in a week or two. So you'll notice that that's going to be due on November the 10th. You also have your Module 6 quiz and your Module 6 discussion activities. So hopefully you've been working through the inclusive practices fieldwork, which we'll look at in just a minute as well. I did upload a video about the case studies and the inclusive practices fieldwork a while ago. So it's on the course homepage. To go back and watch that video, I think you'll find it extremely helpful. Hopefully you've been working through parts as we've been going along. I wanted to also take a second to show you kind of the remainder of the semester because we're kind of getting through a lot of these modules. Now, Module 6 is like all the other modules. You'll see it's 2 weeks long. It starts on the 28th of October and ends on the November the 10th. So after this module, we really only have one module left, which is our Module 7, where we look at what role do you play as an early childhood educator in inclusive classrooms. And then you'll see here that we have our makeup weeks. We, of course, have Thanksgiving break during that time. So any makeup work is going to be during that last section after Module 7. And then we have our finals week. So really, all of the rest of the semester is going to be finishing out our last couple modules and really looking at any makeup work and things that we need to do. Maybe revisions that we have to make, especially for this inclusive practices fieldwork, because this is very important since you're not going into the school system, that we really try our best and give forth as much effort as possible in this fieldwork project, which is a big project with many parts. So that's what the end of our semester is going to kind of be looking like. Now, with that said, I wanted to go jump into our Module 6 and kind of walk you through that, and then we'll take a sneak peek too at our inclusive practices to kind of see where you should be by now, and any questions you can have, we can set up a meeting or a phone call, or we can respond via email. So Module 6 is that second part, right, we talked about. So now that we've had some opportunities to embed some activities and support the child, now we're going to look at the overall well-being. So we're looking mainly at those social emotional skills. What is play, when we talk about social skills play, it's specifically what role is that playing in the overall well-being of a child, right? So we're really looking at, can we help support those social emotional skills to prepare for them for all aspects of life, right? We want them to be able to have executive functioning skills, We want them to be able to self-regulate. These are important skills. We want to embed those social skills in the classroom. But sometimes, as we're working through those social emotional skills and helping them develop that in those early stages, we are going to have some children who exhibit challenging behaviors, right? So if you have a child that is exceptional and say they have a behavior disorder associated with that exceptionality, sometimes the behavior can be chronic. And when it becomes chronic or it's a part of that disability, it really interferes not only with those social emotional skills, but really for them to be successful and interact socially with other children and to be successfully in the classroom. And it's going to require some intervention. And that's really going to be our focus. And we're really looking at what role do you play and what are some things you can do when we're talking about intervention and what that piece looks like in early childhood. So really, we're going to be looking at what a functional behavior assessment is. So before we can put a plan in place, we've got to intervene. And we can create what we call intervention plans. But before we do that, we do an assessment. And this FBA is what I call it, a functional behavior assessment, really talks about, it really looks at assessing really the why behind the behavior. Because we know behaviors communicate something. They're communicating to us the child's trying to get out of something or obtain something, right? For whatever the reason is. And with this communication, we have to get the why behind what's going on. And that's going to allow us to create a behavior plan for that student, right? And we have to support them with what we call like a tiered model. And we're again drawing in those social competence skills that we need to help them. That can be a challenge for them. So you do have some chapters to be reading, and vocabulary and guided questions I offer always to you with some video links. To assess this module, obviously you're going to take your module quiz and you're going to complete what we call a case study behavior plan. Okay, so when it says 1 submission per team, please just take that as you're still doing this individually. But when we say that submission per team, we're thinking about you being on that team for that case study child, right? You were part of that team, so that's what we mean by that. But still, it's just you doing the assignment alone. So you also will have to think about your inclusive practices fieldwork. You will continue that and complete that, and that will also be submitted. So that's kind of an overview of Module 6. Now, as always, I give you your outcome and goals, and focusing questions, which are very helpful for each lesson in Module 6. So specifically, the goals that we're going to get out of Module 6 is what are some social skills, right, that a child should have, and what are their importance when we're trying to develop this for children who have exceptionalities or disabilities. You'll be able to recognize those executive function skills, right, at each critical period in their development. And then looking really at behavior specifically, what are some common triggers, right? You're going to be able to list those triggers in an educational setting, right? Then we're going to look at how do you use a functional behavior assessment and what's that process when we're trying to develop an intervention plan. Okay, so those are our goals. They're going to support our course outcomes, right? Our course outcomes are identify recommended practices and elements for inclusive early childhood programs. Know and understand the causes, classification, and characteristics of developmental disabilities. And then really knowing and understanding how to work effectively with a multidisciplinary team in an effort to coordinate an appropriate educational programming, integrating parents, school, and community resources. So these are really supporting our course outcome goals and supporting the NAEYC standards. I have the guiding questions here for you that's going to help you with each lesson. I always tell students, please read the guiding questions before you begin your chapter readings and module, because it's really going to help support and deepen your understanding of the content and skills. So your chapters you will read, you will be reading 12, 15, and 18. So chapter 12 really focuses on, and you'll see I put specific pages in here I wanted you to focus on in chapter 12 because that was the most important part, but really looking at what's that developmental behavior approach specifically. And then chapter 15 is that social development aspect, right? You're facilitating social development, so what does that look like? And then managing those challenging behaviors for chapter 18. Now I have some terms and vocabulary that's core to the actual text itself, in the chapters, but also looking at within the module of each lesson, you're going to see those vocabulary words. So let's take a second to look at 6.1 lesson. So really this is talking about those social emotional development skills, right? So as you go through each section, you're going to see first we start out with those social skills, those healthy emotionals. That's part of that social emotional development that we're trying to facilitate. During this time, you're really going to be observing the child, really trying to figure out what the child's skills are, kind of where they, where the deficits are that we need to work on. Then we're going to look at next what we call CSEFEL strategies. Okay, so I'm going to click on it for a second. And remember I talked about we were going to look at that pyramid model? Well, CSEFEL stands for the Center on the Social and Emotional Foundations for Early Learning. And this really focuses on young children and those social emotional development of young children and those critical aspects, right? And this is a really good resource because if you're a visual person, this is just a model that helps you look at those different areas, right? So the model is tiered. So we're looking at universal promotion, secondary prevention, and tertiary intervention. And this model really is useful to let you see visually what it would look like when we're saying, how can you as a teacher facilitate these skills, right? We want to be the facilitator so they can gain social emotional skills. Well, if we're looking at the pyramid, you're going to see here that you have these three levels, these three tiers. So universal means everyone, right? So to be effective facilitator, when we're universally the whole class, even if they do not have, say, an exceptionality or disability, we're looking at how do we nurture those relationships, right? How are we nurturing and responsive to our relationships with how we interact with them and how they interact with each other? And then what are some supportive environments? So what does your classroom environment look like? Go back to that UDL, Universal Design for Learning. What does your community in your classroom look like, right? That's that universal promotion that we concentrate on. Then we look at those maybe we're concerned about, that secondary prevention that may need a little bit more extra facilitating. So we're looking at, let's target those social emotional supports and put those in place for those specific students. And then lastly, we look at the intervention model where these may have to have the functional behavior assessment, right? We need to intervene, that tertiary intervention. So this may require intensive intervention. So once we assess them with that functional behavior assessment, then we kind of work through creating that intervention plan specifically for that child. So this pyramid model really walks through and lets you see visually what that model looks like. And then we have executive functions, which obviously is important at this critical period of life. Where would they be? And then what are some activities if we're trying to work specifically on practicing executive functions with early childhood? What are some activities that are really good for you as an educator, as the facilitator? Now, the second part of Module 6 in Lesson 6.2, we focus now on specific challenging behaviors, right? So what does instructive discipline mean, right? So if we look again here, instructive discipline is really talking about this understanding we have, right? So we understand our children, we are able to look at an understanding of, do they have self-control, right? What is their characters like? What does my classroom look like? When I have to correct them, is it more like a treatment of punishing them or correcting them? What does that look like? We look at the family. So all of these things really in this article explains instructive discipline and how people discipline differently, right? And this instructive approach helps us learn now to deal with the challenging behavior by starting with the FBA, right? So really, this article, or this piece of an article by David Elkind, really looks at the concept, and this is just one piece of it, about why it's important and what we mean by instructive discipline. So make sure you read that, so it gives you a deeper understanding and connection. And then we look at challenging behavior, again, looking at a pyramid model, right? Going back to what I covered, in 6.1, we're bringing it over here again, that CSEFLE pyramid model, right? Looking solely at that intervention component, what that individualized component will look like. And guys, as we're going through, you'll see I'll give you links to articles, I'll give you links to web pages, I'm going to give you links to little short videos. These things are really to help you have a deeper understanding, so I encourage you to always look at it. Then we look at PBS and SWPBS. So what does that stand for? So PBS is positive behavior support, and then SWPBS is a school-wide positive behavior support. And they kind of differ. They're not the same thing, right? When we're looking at PBS, we're really looking at how do we approach changing that behavior. We're putting those supports in place. It's really based on the values and research of what we call humanistic values, right? So it's a holistic where we look at the whole child, the child's impact of their family, their behavior, what's going on at home, in the classroom. It's really an effective one for children of all ages, not just early childhood. But when we're looking at school-wide behavior, this is mostly seen today in what we will call Tier 1, right? Where all the expectations are the same for everyone. This cannot always be true in all situations, especially in early childhood or in an inclusive classroom. So that's why there is a difference between those two. The functional approach, you will go through that. Gathering information, right? What is the hypothesis of function? So as we're going through this intervening in behavior, the first step obviously is the functional behavior assessment, right? And as we go through this process, we really have to develop what we call a hypothesis of function. And what this means is, what's the purpose of the behavior? You're going to guess why you think the child's doing this. What the behavior looks like, right? Okay, so the child's doing this during this time. So how we break it down is we like to say ABC. Okay, so ABC are acronyms. So when we're kind of putting our hypothesis statement together, we first look at the behavior, right? The behavior is, what does the behavior look like? Meaning, what does a child do? Then what occurs after the behavior? That's C. C stands for consequence. So what are you telling the child to do? Then A is the hard question, right? What event, right? What's triggering? I look at antecedent as a trigger. What's triggering for this to happen? Like, in what environment or challenging is it they're trying to avoid something, escape something? Is it to get out of something they don't know how to do? Is it too hard? Is it overwhelming them? Are they trying to gain attention? So that A, that antecedent is really the million-dollar question, right? Why is this behavior occurring? What's triggering it? Okay, so that's what event, what person, what situation. So I have examples here of a good hypothesis statement that you would put together based on what was going on. So it says, in the block area, when the other children try to play with her, Mary hits peers on the arm or the face. After Mary hits the other children, the teacher scolds her and directs the peers to the other center. So this is going to give you some information. We know what the behavior is, what she's doing. Mary hits them on the arm when they try to play with her. What happens is the consequence. The teacher scolds her and directs her to go to a different center, right? Directs the peers to go to another center. Okay, so that's the behavior and the consequence. Your hypothesis statement has to look solely at that antecedent, right? So creating your statement, this is what it would look like. When Mary plays with blocks and another child attempts to play in the same center, Mary will hit the peer on the arm and the face. The teacher will scold Mary and move the peer to another center, allowing Mary to obtain sole use of the blocks. Okay, so our last part here is our antecedent. Remember, behaviors communicating something. Does the behavior occur to obtain something or to escape or avoid something? We know Mary wants all the use of the blocks. She doesn't want to share her toys, right? That is going to be your trigger, your antecedent. And that's how you would put together a hypothesis statement inside of a FBA. Now, the last part is really looking at the behavior intervention plan. So now that we figured out what's going on, we can intervene and try to help Mary along, okay? So when we're looking at an intervention plan, a behavior one, and we have our hypothesis statement, now we need to look at what are some essential components that need to be included. Like, what are some prevention strategies? We want to make sure that this behavior stops, right? We do not want it to occur. But you can't just say it's not going to happen anymore. You have to teach them new skills, right? So you're replacing it with something else. So just to say the child will participate appropriately during circle time, it's not going to make this happen, right? That's an example of what we just talked about. You really have to break down the skill and teach that replacement skill to the child. What does the child need to do, and how does he or she need to do it, okay? So the chart down here gives you an example of how you support, okay? You going back again to look at your ABC chart, right? A, antecedent is a trigger. You have your behavior, and then you have your consequence. When you're filling out a chart, and this is, pay attention because this is kind of be what your homework assignment is about. When you're looking at putting a skill, replacing a skill, right, and you're completing a behavior intervention plan, it really represents the process to teach that child. It really outlines how we're going to be successful, right? How are they going to participate in daily activities and routines? So this plan is put as a support to the child, right? It's developed with your team, okay, obviously you, but on the team, you help develop this together. And you have to monitor the outcomes and the progress, right? So that hypothesis statement is the first step, and then that's going to be useful when you are completing your behavior support plan. So here's an example in this chart. So let's say we're supporting Tim. Tim's behavior is he is very aggressive, like verbally aggressive. He threatens people. He's physically aggressive, which means he hits and pushes people and kicks. What happens when he does this, right? So we know his function, right? His trigger is this happens in centers, this happens when he's outside playing with his peers. Anytime he has to be in a group socially, this is where that aggressive behavior comes out. Okay, so this is a trigger for him being with other people. So we want to make sure we're replacing that skill with something else. So what we'd have to do is that we won't need to just do what we've always done because it's not working, because the behavior is chronic at this point. So we have to intervene and step in. So we want to teach him some prevention. So how do we do this? Well, role play is a great way. So in this chart for preventions, I might put, we're going to pre-teach role playing, and we do this as a whole group, right? We can use visual cards to help him remember lessons when he feels threatened or in a difficult situation. We also have to monitor if these things are working. Now, what are those new skills we're talking about that we're going to role play and teach him and have on the visual cards? We're going to teach him how to communicate, right? So maybe asking to play, or can everyone play with the toys, showing everyone what it looks like to play nicely together. And then if he needs help and wants to be by himself and he doesn't want to play, or if he's trying to get toys away from other people, ask the teacher to help him to be inserted into the play. Now, when we're talking about consequences, because they're going to mess up, they're not going to always follow through, we have to make sure that the consequences stay the same as far as the new intervention. So you have to intervene, you always have to be watching. Anytime he does something negative, you're going to reprimand him by saying, okay, these are the skills we taught you. You have to leave the area. You're not going to play with the toys. Give the toys up. Now, here's the challenging behavior. We don't want him to be aggressive during play with a group or with other people. So what we have to do is we have to use cues, right? Using cues to help him remember, how do you ask to help? How do you intervene and ask people to play? How do I provide attention to and support to the child who is attacked? And what's going to happen when this happens and he gets off track? What are the new skills? okay, and constantly reinforcing those, right, and acknowledging those positive behavior, and when he is not doing what he's supposed to, there's consequences, right? So this is a way to support. Now, obviously, if you're not doing monitoring the behavior, you're not going to know if this is working, because you may have to make adjustments, right? You have to give it a try for a while to see if it's going to work. Okay, that's what the behavior intervention plan looks like. Now, after you go through these 2 lessons, it's going to help you complete your Module 6 activity. So I want to take a minute and look at that. So we have a discussion activity here. Okay. Now, when I said that this is going to help you with your activity, I want you to think about why children behave the way that they do, right? How do they respond when they feel stressed or threatened? Well, there's 3 things that you do. You fight, you flight, or you freeze. Now, you're going to watch a video here that says the effects of stress on a child's development. Now, remember, we're concentrating solely on social emotional skills. So, stress can do 3 of the things. Have the child fight, go back to Tim, flight, run away, or freeze. So after you watch the video, you're going to really look at another thing called this PowerPoint, Understanding and Responding to Adverse Childhood Experiences. This PowerPoint's really good because I feel like it takes it a step further than the video. It's really going to talk about how do we respond so we can, if they are doing fight mode or flight mode or freeze mode, how can we help them? You know, because you have to think about some of these things that happen to them could be triggers of something that they've experienced emotional trauma, which a lot of this is. So we have to identify strategies and respond correctly to help the child through these stressful situations. So you have a form here. It kind of looks like this. And this is an example, right, of each one: fight, flight, and freeze. So you're going to select one of the 7. So you will have to have this PowerPoint pulled up. So I'm going to pull it up to show you. On slide 7, 11. Okay, here's the common triggers for children who have been traumatized, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to pick one of them, right? And you see here we have unpredictability or sudden change, transition from one setting to another, feelings of vulnerability, rejection, confrontation, loneliness, sensory overload, right? Here is what this looks like, what they do, right? In fight, so you'll look at a lot of these slides, but starting at 11 is where I want you to pay attention. They fight, flight, and freeze. And it gives you examples of what does it actually look like to them in these different situations. And I want you to concentrate on that, because when you're filling out your form, you're going to see here, it says for you to select one of the 7, right? And you're going to concentrate on that for each section here. That's why I said to look at 12, so you can get an example of what happens to them physically. But what does this look like for this trigger in fight mode? How about in flight mode? What does it look like? In freeze mode, what does it look like? One of those 7 are going to be able to answer that question. And then what's a strategy you could replace it with? Now, as you go through the video and you go through the slides, both of those are connected, and it's really going to help you answer those questions of what kind of strategy could I use in each situation of fight, flight, and freeze. And then I want us to always do a reflection, because I feel like a reflection helps guide our discussion, right? We're able to respond and reply with other people. We have a little bit more meat, if you will. So when we're thinking about you in the classroom, right, what are some things you can do specifically as preventative measures to avoid the trigger occurring? And it could be fight, flight, or freeze. So what could you do in your classroom that's going to help prevent any of these 3, fight, flight, or freeze? Okay, and there's a rubric here too. Now, to get to the discussion, you'll just click on that, and that's going to take you to the discussion board where you can start your new post. And don't forget, you need to reply to at least one other person if you want full credit on the rubric for replies. Now, I said I'd spend a moment talking about the inclusive field work. This is a big project I hope you've been working on. Again, I stress go back and watch the video on the course homepage where I walk through this. It'll say case studies and inclusive practices fieldwork. Watch that video because I break down each part that you need to be working on and answer questions. Now, this project is taking the place of you going in the classroom. So that's why it's a heavy project, because you're not going to be in the classroom being able to observe. But you will, and I'll show you in just a minute, to do this project, you are going to pick what we call a persona. So this is a little bit different than your case study project, right? Because you had a case study child. With this, you're going to use a persona. And what that is a child that has an exceptionality, and you're going to use it specifically for your project. So what you're going to do is really to look at young children in inclusive settings. And you're going to read your persona once you picked it out. You're going to depict those unique exceptionality, right? So what kind of exceptionality or abilities does your child have? Challenges? Are they dual language learner? And you're going to research all about that child's disability or exceptionality and what are their developmental and learning needs. Then, based on that research, you're going to write a 1 to 2 page summary explaining the child's unique characteristics. What are their challenges, the impacts on the environment in the classroom, and their implications for practice. Now, you will also go a step further by doing these parts of the project, where you're going to use responsive teaching strategies, right? And you're going to be designing what we call a play-based learning activity that helps support the child. You're going to be developing what we call an advocacy plan, which promotes inclusive practices, right, for that child specifically. And then we're also going to look at responding to lots of questions throughout. Okay, now this assessment, this project is covering a lot of the NIE-YC standards, right? We're covering Standard 1, Child Development and Learning in Context. We're covering Child Observation Assessment. We are covering developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate teaching practices. We are covering professionalism as an educator. So there's lots of different moving parts and standards we'll be covering. Now, the first part is that summary where I told you you're going to research all about your child, right? So you may have to go beyond your persona, and you're really going to look at all of these things we're talking about. Their exceptionality, have they experienced traumatic life events? What kind of services do they get? Are they dual language learner? What are their learning needs? You're going to research all of that and provide a summary, 1 to 2 page. You need at least 1 page. The second part was where we talk about how do we build partnerships with the family. So you're going to create what we call an informal observation tool. Okay, and this is going to share with the parents. It could be things like a checklist, your notes, a rating scale, and you're going to discuss how you would use these to support that child and also how you use it to collaborate with not only family, but all the professional partnerships you might have. The third part is really looking at how do you foster those positive relationships, right? So each persona has unique experiences, interests, abilities, language, culture, all of that. To go beyond, you have to really gain a deep understanding on how do you foster relationships with those children who have exceptionalities. How do you interact with them? So I have some guiding questions, and you're going to be answering it in part 3. Part 4 is where you're going to create that play-based learning activity. Now, remember, the activity should include all of these things. The title of the activity, what's the child's age group, the standards for the state or objective goals, materials you're going to need, what's the description of learning activity, teaching strategies, any kind of extension ideas. How are you going to assess to make sure the child has learned the skill? There is a template at the very bottom of the project page that you will use to type inside of. Now, the 5th part of this project was where you were going to be advocating for inclusive practices, right? So you were going to create what we call an advocacy plan. And the advocacy plan is going to support the children who are exceptional. So in your plan, you always, for advocacy plan, you're always going to have an introduction, right? What's the importance of you advocating for this specific child? Goals and objectives, assessment and evaluation, inclusive practices, collaboration and communication, resources and support, implementation timeline, and what was your clues and you drew. Again, I provide you with a template where you fill in like a formula by answering these questions in these sections. And then lastly is going to be your reflection, right, for intentional practice, which is one of our standards for NAEYC. You have to reflect on your whole assignment that you completed, all the parts. And I gave you some questions here. And in the questions, I want us to focus solely on your insights you gained, your reflective practice, like what kind of moments that and feelings you had during this. What does intentional strategies look like for you when we talk about intentional practice? And you're going to answer those questions. Now, I do have a format here of how I want it laid out. There is a rubric as well toward the bottom that I want you to read. But you're going to see, you have to have all of these elements included, right? You're going to have a cover sheet. You will have to have part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, labeled exactly like this. So you can do a running Word document, all of it together, but I want it broken up into parts like this. Okay, so your paper will have sections. So think of this as a paper. So you'll see here, here's the template for the play-based activity plan. Here's a template for the advocacy plan. And here is your rubric. Please read the rubric twice. Okay, make sure you use it as a checklist. See how I'm going to grade each section, each part. You'll see what standard it covers, what's the descriptor, and how you're doing. Like, did you meet the expectations? This is what it looks like if you're meeting and progressing. If you did not meet expectations, these are the things that you have. So each part really breaks down what I'm looking for in the 6 parts. Okay. Now, this bottom one at the very end, as just as a resource for you, it just gives you an example of what we mean for the advocacy plan. I thought it'd be helpful. I thought you might want it, especially when you're working on that section. All right, and remember, that's going to be due on November the 10th. So hopefully you've been working on this. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. But I still want you to go back and watch that video on the course homepage because I feel like it would definitely be useful for you. All right, guys, you have a lot of work. We are more than halfway through the semester, so keep pushing forward. I know you're doing great, and you'll continue to do great. Until the next time on the video, take care. Bye-bye.